Ladies and gentlemen, I was hoping, I think it's this guy, was going to call in. You calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Ronald Reagan. I knew your ears would be perking up with today's show.
Right. Well, I actually wanted to call because, Saul thinks he's a second grader. He should look up a little word called stolen valor.
That's 2 words.
Yeah, that's true. Good interview. I thought you did a good job of capturing the sort of cat and mouse game that happens a lot of times at the border. And I've had a lot of clients tell me that the Border Patrol officers will tell them, hey, better luck tomorrow. And there's a real sort of, the old Warner Brothers cartoon with the dog with the hair over its eyes. And I think he's a sheepdog.
Yeah.
I think it might be a Wile E. Coyote, actually. And at the end of the cartoon, like they punch out of work.
Yes.
They get their lunch pails and they just, there's sort of that quality to it. But I actually wanted to talk about COVID, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In my experience sort of with it. So I live in a really conservative area. It's one of the worst hit counties in on the West Coast, at least, or up and down the West Coast. And our sheriff actually said something similar to the sheriff that you played the other day. It's a different county, but basically he's not going to be enforcing the mask mandate. And the mandate does kind of put, law enforcement in a somewhat difficult position. And there are concerns about like how something like that might be enforced and how it could be enforced against certain communities more than others. And I think there's actually better tools than just like it's a misdemeanor not to wear a mask. But listening to my local talk radio, the conversation has 100% been about shut down or open, like that sort of dichotomy. And also just that masks are being told what to do, and Americanism is all about sort of rugged individualism, and we're not going to be told what to do. And I listened to you and Digby try to sort of sort it out on Friday, and it reminded me of being passed by this big lifted truck a few years ago with a big sticker on the back that said, like a giant sticker, it said, "Fuck your Prius." And I was just trying to figure out like what that was about. Prius is just like a fuel efficient car.
Rush Limbaugh spent years on this, where it was like almost, for a couple of years, he would just go through like on a daily basis, brag about how many SUVs are being sold and mock Priuses for, when you get on the highway, you're going to get run over and stuff like this. It was such a cultural signifier. There is such a resent, and it is massaged and nurtured, but there is such a resent when there is an attempt by segments of society to do stuff that makes other people feel a little bit guilty that they're not doing it. And people don't buy. Sure. There's no doubt there are people who, when they buy when they're doing something that they think is good for the environment, I'm sure you can find that an individual will be like a little bit self-righteous about it. But when people buy a Prius, they're not looking at other cars with like, just driving by every, like looking around at every other car and giving them a look. But there's this sense. One of the things that Limbaugh taught me about the conservative mentality is that his whole job was to basically say that doubt that is creeping in, that you might not have a corner on truth, or that creeping doubt that is, that is making you question what you do. Right. For a large swath of people, I would say the majority of people, there is a certain amount of introspection that happens with anything. Like, okay, this person's saying that you should do this. Sometimes you feel a little challenged and you react defensively, but other times you start to contemplate, like, oh, maybe I should have a different perspective on this. The right, at the very least, this is what Limbaugh's project was to train people. Like when you feel that, you must reject it because it is trying to make you weak, and you must reject it hard. So that's why you get "fuck your Prius" on the back of a truck, as if like there is some, like it's an assault on them, because it's all part of the aggrievement thing. And the masks are too. It's like, how can you tell me to wear a mask? Nobody's telling you to wear a mask. We're telling everybody to wear a mask. And that's the point.
Right. I think another thing that we'll look back on as being a major factor in this is Facebook, because something I hear a lot from conservatives with this line of thinking is that we should be doing our own research. And I've noticed on Facebook, I mean, there's sort of like the obvious, just this is a post from some lady and it's like clearly just something she's saying, but there are a lot of these blog posts or websites that look a lot like news. I saw one the other day. It was, KITV 7 or something like that. It sounded like a local news affiliate. And I started reading it, and it just started to sound weird. And then I really had to look at it very closely to realize, like, I don't even know what this is. This isn't like affiliated with any type of journalism or news source. And a lot of these people, I think, really are reading quite a bit about it. And they might even be reading stuff that, like, at first blush seems pretty real. And it's just not. And I'm almost positive that, most of these types are getting it straight from Facebook and these different groups that they're in. And that's a huge problem. But, one of the things, the last thing I wanted to say is, it's been really hard. Like on my mother, she had sort of her little social life, quilting club or whatever. And now she's got to spend all this time with my dad, who's, kind of, it's a whole other thing. But, and it's when stuff starts opening up and people are kind of going out, it becomes really hard for those people who are trying to do the right thing. I mean, if we don't have solidarity, then it's hard. It's hard to see other people are going out, and then you start to feel like maybe I'm the weird one. Like, what am I doing locked in my house all the time? And stuff. People are going to restaurants, and I don't really feel comfortable with that, but I just got invited to this thing, and you know what I mean? And it's a huge problem, but it's hard to imagine.
I am convinced
being a bigger disaster.
I am convinced that, we've had epidemiologists on this program who have said, history of pandemics like this, 6 months from peak 1 to peak 2. And I am convinced that, and when you ask why is that the case, they're like, we don't know. We don't know. And I'm convinced that this pandemic and the United States is going to provide so much data for epidemiologists and social scientists. I think they're going to find that the reason why it takes 6 months is because that is the cycle, how long it takes for like the denial in the human brain and the sort of like that I don't know if you call it peer pressure that you're describing, to take hold. And so I'm quite convinced that in New York, now some people are suggesting it's going to happen even earlier because of the way, but that it goes from like the peak in March, or I should say maybe early April, and it takes 6 months to sort of convince yourself that it's not a big deal, go back out, act in society in such a way that brings it back, and that's it. Like I think they're going to find that the reason why it goes 6 months is that that's a human response as opposed to something with the virus. I totally get that. I mean, you can just feel the creeping sort of like sense of like, because now we're talking about going back to school with the kids. And, I'm planning, if they open school, to send my son to school for a couple of days a week. I don't know that they're going to do that even by the time we get to September. I think things in New York may have changed enough that that idea is out the window. But I also suspect that with school, everything else is going to be like, well, kids are going to school, we can go out and party. And I think then we're back out in October. I mean, there's a big push you can start to see in the past couple of days where a lot of these medical folks are saying, like, we need to make a decision between being able to go to bars or being able to send kids to schools. And the problem is that for the most part, my bet would be those are two different constituencies. Like, you're a parent of a couple of small kids. Your bar days are probably not as vigorous as they were prior to your kids, right? I mean, we're talking about two different constituencies here, broadly speaking. And
But it also strikes me that like I had a situation with an assistant. I had to hire somebody, and we got him trained, and he got COVID. And luckily, so he went home, and we couldn't get tested. We were told, you got to go home for 2 weeks and just don't do anything, and hopefully you don't get it. That was go quarantine with your healthy family and see if you get it or not. And then he was, really, really stunning to see what it did to him. Luckily, he's on the recovery, but I talked to him a couple times on the phone. He couldn't talk. There's been like a real lack of coverage of like what it actually does to people. And just as a PMC small business owner, it's highly disruptive to have to spend 2 weeks at home. I've been mostly working from home anyway, so I'm lucky to be able to do that. But if you have a teacher who gets it, and then the message to, I guess, like all the kids and all their families is, unless you're in a place where they're testing non-symptomatic people, which we're still not doing here, everybody's got to go home and just hang out for 2 weeks and wait to see if they get symptoms. The problem with reopening or going back to school or any of that is there's no infrastructure in place to like facilitate,
tracing,
contact tracing,
right. I think in New York, there's a little bit more of that than I would imagine in most places. But broadly speaking, look, here's the deal. And I'm going to let you go and play a little clip of Sean Hannity. But Ronald Reagan, always a pleasure. This is where we do that Reagan drop.
Reagan.
Thank you, Jamie.
Trying my best. Can I say one like broader thing about this?
Yeah.
Before we move on, I think what we're seeing here is decades of, capitalist logic, but, more specifically neoliberal capitalist logic, which is the water we're all swimming in, that says the onus is on individuals to make changes rather than any kind of policy, society-wide, thing at the policy level. And, Democrats have also been somewhat complicit in this, acting like, your individual consumer choices can affect the environment more than, say, policy level measures like, I don't know, a Green New Deal. In this case, the Democrats are certainly being better at enacting things on a policy level, but people just do not want it. And it's turned into like a culture war thing as well, right? Because the right doesn't want to, they don't want to be individually responsible for society, but they also don't want it on a policy level.
Yeah. I think that I definitely think, and it's hard to disaggregate this, right? The Democrats passed the $3 trillion HEROES Act. There's a lot of garbage in it. As AOC said the other day, but there's also, some real stuff in there. And, like the $1,200 one time actually helped with people living in poverty. But there's two steps, right? One is like the government shows that it's taking it seriously, and it does so by saying like, here's money for you not to go to work. However the mechanism which they do it, whatever it is. But here's money for you not to go to work because we're living with a pandemic. It's a real problem. But to ask people to wear masks and to mandate it, even if you're not going to, police it, which I actually think is the best way to do it. You put it out as a mandate, and you just you take a prosecutorial discretion and say, we're going to put that low down. But by making an official proclamation that it's mandated, I've gotten emails from people that said, like, when they said mandate, I could just see that mask use went up. There's no way to escape in this instance. Like, I'm with you in terms of like a Green New Deal relative to like, you got to turn your lights off or something. Yes, we need a policy, but mandating that everybody wears masks is a government policy. Like, you can't, and that it's turned into a cultural war thing is, I think, a function of like addled brains. I just don't know what to say. Yeah. Like, there's just, it's just, there is a base of people who are skeptical of science, part because of their religiosity, part because they live around a lot of religiosity, in part because it has been a 50-year project by the right. Look up Gertrude Himmelfarb, Bill Kristol's mom, talking about the value of attacks on science as a way of sort of unleashing the right's ability to make everything into an opinion. I mean, you see this in the context of, you got your facts, I've got my facts type of thing. And so we are uniquely positioned to have the most disastrous response. I mean, we already have, but like, this is historical. I mean, this is like, people, how many times like people cited at the beginning of this, that Philadelphia parade. This is like the whole country is that Philadelphia parade. And we were talking about it's 100 years ago. And now we're talking about the whole country's response. And there is, with Philadelphia, at least sitting here in 2020, you could be like, well, it's the year 1918, the technology was such that, maybe there wasn't, you're only like, whatever, 50 years out from the germ theory, and maybe people just there wasn't widespread acceptance and understanding of this, or, whatever it was. Like, there's no excuse now, right? Like, there's just our own collective ignorance as a society. Yeah. And here's an example of the bathing in ignorance that we do here in this country.